Well, it's lovely to sit down with two former Prime Ministers, like-minded countries, obviously, with our shared challenges, but plenty of opportunities. And I think both having served as Prime Ministers on the centre-right, I'm also keen to explore some of the challenges that conservative politics, centre-right politics is facing around the world. Liz, I'll start with you because you're in Australia at a momentous time. We've just commemorated 12 months on from the atrocities of October 7 and they're being felt obviously all around the world still today. But it's been a real challenge for cohesion in Australia. I'd be keen on your observations since you've been here about how we're handling division so far away in our own country.
I think we're facing similar issues in Britain that I see in Australia, which is, people should be commemorating the appalling events of October the 7th, but we've seen it tried to be hijacked for protest, and some people even claiming that those appalling events didn't happen. And I think it's part of a broader issue that people within our own societies in places like Australia or the United Kingdom are questioning the very basis of our values and our civilization. How on earth can they be protesting in favour of regimes that stone people, stone gay people, at the same time as advocating transgender ideology? It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's this questioning of our values that I find so worrying, because my view is what's made Australia great, what's made Britain great, is a belief in freedom, democracy, individual liberty, and that's the opposite of what we saw at those appalling events in Israel.
Is that because we've given up on integration, do you think? When we've brought migrants in, we've given up on demanding that they adopt our values?
Well, I think the left have been very successful at pursuing socialism by different means. And whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or the transgender ideologues, they're basically saying the way we've lived our lives, our belief in families, individuals, the nation state, is somehow something to be ashamed of. And instead, those things are old-fashioned, they're part of history, and we need to move forward with this identity agenda. It's all about which group you're in, it's not about your individual talents and your individual capabilities. And I think that culture we have allowed, even though in Britain we've had a Conservative government for the last 14 years, we've seen these things be taught in our schools. The idea that you can become a woman if you're a man, if you just don't like your gender. The idea that the British history is something to be ashamed of, and instead, we need to. All cultures are equal. There's no difference between what's going on the streets of Iran and what's going on in the streets of Birmingham, which is completely ludicrous. And I think too many people on the right have said, well, we don't want to be on the wrong side of history, so we don't want to fight back against those arguments. We need to just accept that the world has changed. And I think that's completely wrong. I think we're actually destroying our societies from within, and we're also projecting weakness towards regimes like Iran and Russia and China, because they think, well, if people on the streets of Britain are campaigning in favour of Hamas, then they don't believe in themselves anymore. And that encourages them to attack Israel or invade Ukraine.
One of the things that has been picked up here in the media, obviously, was congratulatory messages from Hezbollah to protesters in Australia. Hezbollah was noticing what was happening on the streets of Melbourne and Sydney in particular. And then we obviously have a parliamentary motion that fails to be able to bring the two major parties of government together to condemn what occurred just on 12 months ago. Now, you're a long-time observer of politics, Tony Abbott. Did you think we'd ever be in a situation where the Parliament, the two major parties of the Parliament, could not agree to condemn terrorism?
Well, I never thought, Peter, that we'd be in a situation where people would be even-handed as between a liberal democracy, Israel, and an apocalyptic death cult, Hamas. And yet there are obviously people in our country, quite a lot of people it seems in our country, judging by the number of protesters over the last 12 months, who are on the side of the apocalyptic death cult, Hamas, as opposed to the liberal democracy, Israel. And for all sorts of reasons, our government appears to be ambivalent as well. Now, I know that they're worried about the Muslim vote, in inverted commas, in some seats in Western Sydney, but in the end, leadership has got to be about doing what is right, not doing what is merely politically convenient. And the job of politicians is to manage the affairs of the country in accordance with a set of values and principles, to nudge the country in a better direction in accordance with your principles and values. And that's what I think the centre-right has sometimes lost in recent times. We've gone with the flow rather than created a contest of ideas and created a clear contest with the other side.
It wasn't so long ago that you were Prime Minister dealing with Islamic State. There was no celebration of Islamic State. You had no issues getting Labor to support tougher terrorism legislation. Now that's a handful of years. What's changed in Australia?
Well, I think that we've had more years of indoctrination, lefty indoctrination in our education system. We've had more years of uncontrolled legal immigration without a stress on being part of Team Australia once you're here. And I think just at the moment we've got a government which is conflicted because, as I said, they can't seem to decide whose side they're on. And that was why the motion in the Parliament yesterday or this week was so wishy-washy, and on the one hand and on the other hand. Well, again, in any existential dispute between a terrorist group on the one hand and a functioning liberal democracy under the rule of law, there's no contest. You've got to be on the side of the State of Israel.
Do you think the West, Liz, is ashamed of Western values? Have we lost confidence in the West?
So I don't think the majority of people in Britain or Australia have lost confidence in the West or their countries. I think most normal people who live in towns and cities across the United Kingdom believe in Britain. They want our country to be successful. They're patriots. I think the problem is the establishment in our countries has moved to the left. And what do I mean by that? I mean the civil service and the bureaucracy, major corporations,
the universities,
a lot of the media. They've moved to the left significantly, and the left have been very successful at capturing those institutions. If you look at issues like climate alarmism, you know, it's completely been pushed everywhere, and it's unacceptable to say anything. It's unacceptable to be in favour of gas or fracking or even nuclear, I'm hearing here in Australia. Likewise, using pronouns and all of these things have infiltrated the establishment. I think one of the issues Conservatives have is understanding that we are no longer the parties of the establishment. We're actually the parties of the people, the vast majority of people who are patriotic, who want to work hard, who want to have a nice car, who want to go on holiday. Those are our supporters. We're no longer going to win over the liberal elites. And those are the people who are, alongside Islamists. Those are the people going on the protests. The people in Extinction Rebellion who are gluing themselves to the motorway in Britain. They're not poor people, they're rich people with trust funds.
So do you think the Tory party gets that? That the party machine gets that?
In a word, no.
No.
No. And that is our problem, and this is why at the 2024 election we were decimated. We weren't decimated because Keir Starmer was popular. He only got 34% of the vote. His premiership so far has been an utter disaster. But we were decimated because the vote on the right was split between the Conservatives and Reform. And the reason that Nigel Farage was able to make such inroads is Conservatives are left office with the highest immigration in 40 years, the highest taxes in 70 years, and people felt that wokery, sort of human rights culture had infected our country, and Conservatives hadn't done enough to stand up to it. So it was a rejection of Conservatives rather than a positive vote for Keir Starmer. But we now have this very difficult issue that the right is split. And I think some of the recent opinion polls have Reform on 20% and Conservatives on 24%. So we're looking like a replay unless we get our act together.
And a lot of this is similar here, isn't it?
Look, it is, Peter. And part of the difficulty is that our centre-right party, the Liberal Party, it's still run out of the rich, leafy inner suburbs, and yet increasingly its vote is in the aspirational working suburbs, if you like, of Western Sydney and Melbourne.
Made you Prime Minister.
Correct, and it's those areas that made Boris Johnson Prime Minister. So look, we need to better reflect the aspirations, the values and the instincts of the people who want to vote for us and do vote for us when we create a clear contest of ideas. And as Liz was saying, we should be the patriotic parties. We should be the parties that, sure, we believe in freedom, yes, we believe in tradition, but above all else, we believe in our countries. We think they are the best countries in the world to live, and we want to keep them that way. Now, I think that the vast majority of Britons, the vast majority of Australians are instinctively proud, and they can't understand why their leaders are so apologetic and constantly accommodating all these others who, frankly, don't seem to have been as successful in their countries. So why are we constantly bending over backwards to appease them? And I think this is part of the difficulty. I mean, Boris Johnson won a mighty victory on Brexit, and yet there was still this agonising over the European Convention on Human Rights, which was stopping the Conservative government from a proper border protection policy and stopping the boats in the English Channel.
But this goes to Liz's point. I mean, it's one thing to win office. It's another thing to do something with the power you have to actually make a difference according to your values.
We've been in office but not in power because
so how do you
the
deal?
civil service have been
Well, just on that, how do you deal then with these captured institutions?
But I think there are two problems in Britain. One is that not enough Conservative MPs were prepared to vote for the policies that would have transformed the country, because people voted for change. They voted for change in 2016 when they voted for Brexit. They voted again for change when they voted for Boris in 2019. But we didn't remove the EU laws off the statute books. We didn't deal with the Human Rights Act so that we could stop illegal immigration. Taxes went up. We didn't do fracking. And the reason we didn't do a lot of those things is Conservative MPs weren't prepared to vote for them. There's probably about a third of the parliamentary party that were prepared to vote for those things, because many of the parliamentary party are still of the old mindset, which is the people who are our voters are the establishment. We don't want to upset them. We don't want to say these nasty things about the ECHR. We don't want to get on with fracking because the people we meet at dinner parties love the environment and they're very concerned about net zero and they care about COP26. So that was what was going on in the party. But I think at the same time, the bureaucracy in Britain got very, very powerful under Tony Blair. So you need an even stronger parliamentary party to actually repeal all the laws that put that bureaucracy in place. And again, Conservatives weren't prepared to take that bureaucracy on. I mean, that's what I tried to do when I was Prime Minister in 2022, is take on the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Bank of England, who'd presided over a stagnant economy. But what I found was they were able to blame me for their failings, and in many cases Conservative MPs went along with that because they weren't prepared to take on these very powerful independent institutions. And my view is until we're prepared to do that, we're not going to be able to enact Conservative policies. Because every single area of the British government, whether it's the Migration Advisory Council, the Climate Change Committee, there are all these independent bodies staffed by leftists. They just don't want to. They don't want to play ball.
And you had some experience of this too. Some policy areas where it was very difficult to make change, or it would be a multi-term project. How do we around the centre right around the world tackle the issue of institutions? Because it's not just in the UK and it's not just in Australia.
Well, we have to first of all appreciate that the modern establishment is not a conservative establishment, it's a green left establishment. So we have to accept that the system is going to tend to work against us rather than for us. And then we've got to be prepared to just wear them down with better argument and more persistence. And one of the most disappointing things about contemporary Australian politics is that we haven't been prepared to tackle the educational system, which is in many ways at the heart of the difficulty. Now, I know that under David Cameron, when Michael Gove was the Education Secretary, a lot of good things happened with charter schools and things like that in Britain. We haven't had anything comparable thus far in Australia. We haven't had any of the state coalition governments, for instance, make a much more rigorous, much more parent-influenced school system a real crusade for them. But something like that is at the heart of long-term change for the better, and rediscovering faith in our country is very much at the heart of long-term change for the better. And this is why one of the things that I hope will happen if there is a change of government here in Australia at the next election is that we will only fly the one flag that represents all of us. We will not begin all civic events with an acknowledgement that the country belongs more to some people than to others, because while these at one level are small things, they help to shape a mindset. And in the end, we have got to be one proud, cohesive country that is going forward together, not as a kind of collection of mini nations.